My family never let me forget the day I dropped out of med school. At every holiday dinner, every birthday gathering, every phone call that should have been about catching up but instead turned into a trial, they reminded me I was a quitter. My father's voice dripped with contempt as he said, "All that potential wasted." My mother would sigh dramatically, as though I'd died, telling relatives how I threw everything away. My brother, the golden child who had made it through residency, used me as a punchline at family gatherings, sneering, "Maybe Robinson can heal you with essential oils." They laughed until their sides hurt, until I excused myself and locked myself in the bathroom just to breathe. But what none of them understood was that medicine, the way they worshipped it, wasn't healing to me. It was machinery, rules, numbers, rigid systems designed to fit everyone into a single mold. I didn't fit. I wanted to listen to patients, to find connections between mind and body, to integrate treatments instead of just prescribing pills and walking away. When I dropped out, it wasn't because I couldn't handle it, it was because I couldn't stand betraying myself anymore. But try explaining that to a family who only measured worth in titles and salaries. For years, I was the shadow at reunions, the whisper of failure when I walked into a room. My cousins graduated, got married, bought homes, and each time, my parents would look at me with that silent disappointment that cut deeper than any words. But I was working, studying, building something no one could see yet. I threw myself into holistic medicine, learning from practitioners around the world, attending workshops, reading everything I could get my hands on. I scraped by with side jobs, pouring every cent into my dream, building a clinic brick by brick, idea by idea. When I opened my doors, my family scoffed. "A fake doctor's office," my brother joked, loud enough for everyone at Thanksgiving to hear. "Don't expect any of us to come crawling to you when we're sick." My mother said, "This is embarrassing, Robinson. You should have been a surgeon by now. Instead, you're playing house." I swallowed the hurt, smiled politely, and went back to work. And slowly, patients started coming. At first it was a trickle, someone with chronic back pain, someone else with migraines no doctor could fix. Then more came, people desperate, people who had been dismissed by traditional medicine. Word spread. My waiting list grew. But my family didn't see that, or maybe they didn't want to. To them, I was still the dropout, the disgrace. Until the case. One of my patients, a woman dismissed by every specialist she'd seen, found relief under my care. She was battling an insurance company that refused to acknowledge her condition, claiming it was all in her head. She asked me to testify on her behalf. I hesitated. After all, I wasn't an MD, not the way my family defined it. But I agreed. I stood in that courtroom, armed not with a white coat and stethoscope, but with years of knowledge, compassion, and evidence of what my patient had endured. The opposing lawyer tried to discredit me, mocking my credentials, calling me not a real doctor. The words stung because they echoed my family's voices. But I stood firm. I laid out the facts, explained the treatments, connected the dots no one else had cared to. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. Then the judge leaned forward, looked me in the eye, and said, "Thank you, Dr. Robinson." In that moment, everything stopped. The years of mockery, the laughter, the dismissive sighs, it all collapsed under the weight of that single word, doctor. Not the kind my family had wanted, but the kind I had fought to become. And as my patient won her case, tears streaming down her face, I realized the sweetest revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was proving, beyond doubt, that I had been right all along. When the judge uttered those words, "Thank you, Dr. Robinson," it should have been the triumph that finally silenced every cruel laugh I had endured, every smirk, every backhanded insult my family had flung at me over the years. But victory never tastes as clean as we imagine. The moment I stepped out of the courtroom, with my patient clutching my hands and sobbing her gratitude, the news had already spread through my family like wildfire. Not that they congratulated me, of course. No, the Robinson clan did what they did best. They twisted it into a new reason to belittle me. My brother, smug and sanctimonious, called me the next day. His voice dripped venom as he said, "So, the court actually let you play pretend doctor in front of a judge? Impressive. Did you hand out herbal tea and crystals too?" I hung up before he could finish his laughter, but my chest ached with that familiar sting of being shoved back into the role of the family's joke. My parents, of course, didn't even mention the case at all when they saw me that weekend at a cousin's engagement party. They breezed past me as though I was a piece of furniture, asking everyone else about their promotions, their new homes, their Ivy League schools. When my turn came, my mother finally turned her sharp gaze on me and asked in front of everyone, "Still wasting your life in that little clinic of yours?" I wanted to scream, to shake her until she saw what I had built with my own blood and sweat. Instead, I smiled tightly and said nothing. Because I realized something. Silence was no longer defeat. Silence was strategy. They thought I was still the fragile dropout desperate for their approval. But I had changed. Every insult was fuel now, not poison. What they didn't know, what they couldn't even fathom, was that my clinic was thriving beyond their wildest expectations. My waiting list stretched months ahead. Patients drove in from other states, desperate for care that traditional medicine had abandoned them on. My methods weren't just alternative nonsense, as my family sneered. They were saving lives, changing lives. And with each passing month, I gained not only respect, but also influence. I started publishing papers, speaking at conferences, collaborating with researchers who saw in me what my family refused to. Slowly, the word doctor became attached to my name outside that courtroom, not because of a degree stamped by an institution, but because of results that no one could deny. And then, as fate would have it, karma began weaving its threads. My father, the man who had called me a disgrace at every opportunity, began suffering from a condition no doctor could pinpoint. He went through battery after battery of tests, each specialist shrugging, each prescription failing. My mother called me one evening, her voice shaking. She didn't ask me outright to help. Pride still clung to her like armor, but her silence after describing his worsening pain was a plea in itself. I could have refused. I could have reminded her of every time she rolled her eyes, every time she told me I'd embarrass the family name. But I didn't. Instead, I told her to bring him to my clinic. The irony was almost poetic. The man who had called me a failure was now sitting on my exam table, his hands trembling, his face pale with suffering. He didn't look at me, not at first. He couldn't. His pride was too heavy a chain. But as I examined him, asked questions no one else had asked, connected dots that years of real doctors had ignored, I saw it. The flicker of realization in his eyes that maybe, just maybe, I was not the disappointment he had believed. I developed a treatment plan, slow and steady, and for the first time in months, he improved. The man who once spat the word dropout at me now looked at me with something foreign respect, perhaps even gratitude. My mother still bristled, unwilling to admit aloud that I had done what their beloved medical establishment could not. But I didn't need her words. I could see it in her silence, in the way she lingered by my office door after appointments, as though the weight of decades of judgment was cracking just slightly. Yet my brother, the golden child, was another story. He doubled down on his scorn, furious that the pedestal he had been perched on all his life was beginning to crumble. He told anyone who would listen that I was dangerous, that my methods were a scam, that I had no right to call myself a doctor. He even tried to sabotage me, filing complaints with medical boards, attempting to smear my reputation online. But every attempt backfired. Patients rallied behind me, flooding forums with their success stories, writing testimonials that drowned out his venom. The harder he fought, the more foolish he looked, the more the world began to see him for what he was, not a hero, but a jealous sibling choking on his own bitterness. And so, the stage was set for the ultimate shift in power within my family. The same people who once mocked me now whispered my name with awe behind closed doors. My parents, though reluctant, began attending events at my clinic, too proud to admit their change of heart but too desperate for health and reputation to stay away. My brother's fury grew into obsession, his resentment consuming him. And me? I didn't need their apologies anymore. Their approval no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had built my own empire from the ashes of their rejection. And deep down I knew, the sweetest revenge wasn't in shouting, "I told you so." It was in living so fully, so brilliantly, that they could never laugh at me again. My brother's obsession with destroying me became the shadow that haunted every success I achieved, and at first, I dismissed it as little more than childish jealousy. The tantrum of a man who had always been the family's golden boy and could not bear to see the spotlight shift. But his envy was not harmless. It grew sharper, more desperate, more venomous with each passing week. He began targeting my patients directly, posing online as a concerned citizen and posting long rants about how my clinic was a fraud, how I had no real medical credentials, how I was leading vulnerable people into danger. At first, I worried. After all, reputations can shatter quickly in the digital age. But what he didn't understand was that my patients were not faceless strangers, they were a community. They had lived the transformation my work had brought. They had felt the relief after years of being dismissed, and they weren't about to let one bitter man destroy that. They flooded forums and social media with their own testimonies, videos, pictures, even medical records proving their recoveries. Every smear post he launched was drowned out by a tidal wave of truth, and soon his efforts only made me more visible, more credible. Still, he didn't stop. He grew reckless, his desperation twisting him into something almost unrecognizable. He hacked into one of my research collaborators' emails, trying to fabricate data manipulation and frame me. But digital footprints are a stubborn thing, and it didn't take long before the trail of evidence led back to him. I didn't press charges, not yet. I wanted him to hang himself with his own rope, and I knew patience would serve me better than vengeance delivered too soon. The breaking point came when he took it one step further. He filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I was practicing medicine illegally, endangering lives, and running a fraudulent business. My parents, caught in the middle, were silent, too cowardly to take a side. My mother's eyes flickered with fear when she handed me the legal notice, as though she wanted to warn me but couldn't bring herself to betray her precious son. I could have panicked. I could have folded under the weight of courtrooms, legal battles, the scrutiny of strangers peering into every corner of my work. But I didn't. I prepared. For weeks, I gathered every shred of evidence, every testimony, every patient willing to stand by me. By the time we walked into that courtroom, my brother swaggered with arrogance, his lawyers armed with accusations, convinced they would bury me once and for all. But what he hadn't expected was that I had built more than a clinic. I had built an army of truth. Patient after patient testified. Experts I had worked alongside presented research. Even my father, frail but grateful for the improvement he had experienced under my care, took the stand and admitted that I had succeeded where countless doctors had failed. Watching my brother's face as his case unraveled was like watching a mask crack apart. His smirk faded, his arrogance curdled into rage, and finally into panic. The judge's words struck like a gavel through his ego. Not only was the lawsuit dismissed, but the court also ordered him to pay damages for defamation and malicious prosecution. It was poetic justice, the golden boy, forced to publicly eat the very lies he had spread. My family's silence afterward was deafening. My mother avoided my gaze entirely. My father muttered something about pride he had never felt able to express before, and my brother, he disappeared from family gatherings altogether, his humiliation too heavy to bear. And me? I walked out of that courthouse taller than ever. For years, they had laughed at me, mocked me, tried to crush me under the weight of their expectations. But now, I was the one standing unshaken, the one they could no longer dismiss. My revenge was not in their defeat, it was in my victory, carved out despite them. And yet, I knew deep down, this wasn't the end of the war. Because envy doesn't die with one loss, it festers. And I could feel it already. My brother would come back, darker, more dangerous, his desperation sharper than ever. But now I wasn't afraid. Let him try. I was ready. After the courtroom disaster, most people would have backed down, licked their wounds, and tried to rebuild their lives quietly, but not my brother. Humiliation didn't humble him, it poisoned him. He disappeared for a while, long enough for me to think maybe he had finally accepted defeat. Maybe the war was over. But shadows rarely vanish. They bide their time, and he was plodding in the dark, waiting for his moment. At first, the signs were subtle. Unexplained supply shortages at my clinic, shipments of critical medical equipment delayed or mysteriously canceled, emails to potential investors going unanswered when they had been enthusiastic weeks earlier. Then came the whispers, rumors that I was under investigation, that I had bribed the judge in the lawsuit, that I was experimenting on patients behind closed doors. Of course, I knew where it all came from, but proving it was another matter. He had grown more cunning after his first loss, hiding behind anonymous accounts, hiring others to do his dirty work, planting seeds of doubt in places I couldn't easily reach. And yet, his hatred wasn't satisfied with sabotage alone. One night, long after the clinic had closed, I was working late when I smelled smoke. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe a faulty wire or someone burning leaves outside. But then the alarm shrieked, and I ran into the hallway to see flames licking up the walls, devouring the very place I had built with my own hands. Panic surged through me, but instinct took over. I pulled extinguishers, called emergency services, fought back the inferno with everything I had until the firefighters stormed in and dragged me outside. The damage was brutal. Half the clinic destroyed, thousands of dollars in equipment gone, files and research reduced to ash. And in that devastation, standing across the street with his hands shoved casually into his pockets, was my brother. He didn't even flinch when our eyes met. He smirked, as if daring me to accuse him without proof. I wanted to tear him apart right there, but I knew that was exactly what he wanted, for me to explode, to give him ammunition. Instead, I stayed silent, documenting everything, building my case brick by brick, just like I had before. Because what he didn't know was that the fire hadn't erased everything. I had off-site backups of all my research, encrypted and stored. Within days, I was up and running again in a temporary space, and my patients, loyal to the core, followed me. If anything, the fire only drew more attention to my work. Local media covered it, highlighting both the tragedy and the resilience of rebuilding. Donations poured in, volunteers offered help, and what my brother had meant as my downfall turned into my rebirth. But the fire was only the beginning of his spiral. He sank deeper into crime, desperate to ruin me. He forged financial documents to try and make it look like I was embezzling money. He paid off a disgruntled former staff member to lie about malpractice. He even tried to bribe one of my patients to claim I had caused them harm. Each time, though, his schemes unraveled, not because I was untouchable, but because truth has a way of enduring. And with each failure, he grew more dangerous, more unhinged. Friends warned me to leave the city, to cut ties completely, but I refused. Running would mean letting him win, and I had spent my whole life under the weight of his shadow. No more. So I tightened security, installed cameras, hired investigators, and most importantly, I prepared my counterattack. Because while he thought he was tearing me apart, what he didn't realize was that every move he made was leaving a trail, a map of his obsession, his crimes, his downfall. And this time, I wouldn't settle for courtroom victories or public vindication. This time, I was going to end it so thoroughly, so completely, that he would never be able to rise again. My revenge was no longer about proving myself. It was about survival, justice, and finally cutting the poison out of my life for good. For months, I let my brother believe he was winning, that his relentless attacks were finally wearing me down. I played the part of the exhausted victim, barely holding my clinic together, scrambling to keep my reputation intact while his schemes grew bolder. But behind the facade, I was quietly weaving a trap, one built not on emotion or vengeance alone, but on cold, meticulous strategy. I hired a private investigator, a man who had once worked cybercrimes for the FBI, to dig into my brother's finances and communications. We found a treasure trove: burner phones linked to his accounts, payments to arsonists, anonymous emails traced back to his IP addresses, recordings of conversations where he bragged about finally crushing Robinson. I didn't go to the police right away. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I began to feed him just enough bait to make him confident. I leaked whispers that a wealthy investor was about to pour millions into my practice, that I had secured a grant worth more than everything he had ever earned. Predictably, his greed eclipsed his caution. He launched his boldest attack yet, forging documents in my name to reroute that imaginary funding into an offshore account. What he didn't know was that every step of the transaction was being monitored by federal agents I had tipped off. When he clicked confirm on the transfer, the trap snapped shut. They raided his house within hours, seizing hard drives, hidden cash, fraudulent documents, evidence so overwhelming he couldn't squirm out of it with excuses or lies. But I didn't stop there. While the legal machine chewed through his crimes, I orchestrated a final humiliation. I stood before the same judge who had once thanked me for my contributions to the community, presenting every piece of evidence with calm precision. The court watched the recordings of him admitting to arson, to fraud, to trying to destroy me out of nothing but envy. His mask cracked in front of everyone, family, neighbors, former colleagues, until he was nothing more than a desperate, raging man in handcuffs. The sentence was brutal: 25 years in federal prison without parole. As the bailiffs dragged him away, he screamed my name, his voice raw with hatred, but it no longer cut into me. It sounded weak, hollow, a final whimper from a man who had gambled everything and lost. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, microphones thrust into my face, reporters begging for comment. I simply said, "Justice isn't revenge. It's balance." Today, the balance has been restored. And with that, I walked away, not as the dropout who had been mocked, not as the brother who had lived in another man's shadow, but as Robinson, the man who endured betrayal, fire, lies, and sabotage and emerged unbroken. My clinic thrived, more patients than ever coming through the doors, my reputation now untouchable. But the true victory wasn't in the success or the money or the accolades. It was in knowing that the ghost of my brother's envy no longer haunted me, that I had cut the poison from my life once and for all. And sometimes, when the night grows quiet, I think back to that smirk he gave me across the flames of my burning clinic, and I smile. Because in the end, it wasn't fire that consumed me. It was fire that consumed him.